Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. Today's episode number 19. And I'm really, really excited to have Bob Meltzer, our guest today, who is the founder of VISANOW, which today is Envoy Global. Bob is an immigration lawyer. Well, first he was an international lawyer, turned into an immigration lawyer. You know, just like many of us had this epiphany and idea of, hey, digitize, we have to digitize. So and launched what became known as VISANOW and then Envoy Global. We're going to dive into that whole story. I'm Roman Zelchenko, your host. I'm also an immigration lawyer turned immigration tech founder. I'm the founder of Laborless, which brings H-1B compliance automation, as well as GMI Rocket, which brings you this show. So, Bob, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate your time and appreciate you being on here and having this discussion.
Thank you for having me. You know what? I just realized I forgot my Laborless T-shirt.
Ah, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Oh man, that would have been awesome.
I know I should have had it underneath. Anyway, yeah. Thanks for having me.
For anybody listening, I did a small kind of fundraiser where I had some folks kind enough like Bob to get some Laborless T-shirts, and then I ended up donating all the proceeds to an immigration nonprofit here in New York City. So that was really awesome.
Great thing.
Yeah. So Bob, as we kind of were chatting before, and I know you and I have talked about this a little bit earlier, immigration tech is something that now I think is finally getting the time of day that it deserves. The kind of the coverage, the press coverage, the legal tech sort of standing, if you will. But it wasn't always like this. One of the reasons I'm super intrigued, and I think everyone who knows you and knows VISANOW is intrigued, is you were in many ways one of the trailblazers. I think around the 1999 to 2000 era is when we went from virtually nothing, or at least not sort of cloud-based or virtual programs, to virtual solutions, right? There was you and INS Zoom and Tracker sort of were all born around the same time. But before we dive into all that, I always love, and I think a lot of folks love to get the kind of background of the individuals. I'm just curious, can you talk a little bit about, I know you went to college in Colorado, and then you went to law school back in Chicago. Are you originally from the Chicago area?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up in the Chicago area and went out to school in Colorado, like you said. Mm-hmm. And at the time, there were a lot of people in our area that went to places like Colorado. It was a beautiful place to go to school. But I knew that I really wanted to get back to the Midwest for law school. Like, I thought it would be too hard to stay focused if I was going to be in Colorado and try and get through law school. So I came back to stay. Came back to the Midwest, came back to Chicago area, and decided to go to law school in this area.
Do you remember why you kind of decided to go out to Colorado? And I'm asking this as a New York City kid. I love the mountains.
That's it. I mean, first of all, if you had the opportunity to go somewhere beautiful, that was a big part of it. But also somewhere that Colorado, there's skiing and there's, beauty and wonderful outdoor activities. So that was a plus. That was a plus.
Was there a big craft beer scene back then, or
zero?
Not quite yet.
No, it was, in fact, gosh, if you're going to talk about beer, what I remember was at the time, one of the exciting parts of being in Colorado, because distribution was very different. I mean, I'm dating myself a little bit here, but we didn't get Coors beer in Chicago at the time. You had and that was the exciting thing about being out in Colorado. Like, whoa, I can be able to get some Coors beer. At the time in Chicago, we drank Stroh's, which was Detroit. I think that was like our big beer. And I remember they used to take a truck from the Midwest full of Stroh's and bring it out to Colorado and then return it with a big truck full of Coors beer, and it would be a special like in those areas. So no craft beer. No, it was exciting to have Coors.
That's funny. I think I went to the Schlafly Brewery, which is based down in the St. Louis area. That was like it's always fun for me to see regional big beers. So it's not quite, not the Coors or the Bud Light or the Budweiser that you have today, but there still are some regional breweries that are actually quite large. and they sell their 15 or 30 pack of beers in the grocery store. And I kind of love seeing that. Yeah, I was just curious because I think if for me going out there, it would have been something around the combination of, yes, a great education, but also the ability to go and see beautiful mountains and, kind of enjoy life a little bit differently.
That was it. And we go back there. I still love, I probably visit there once a year.
And so when you finished out with college, did you go immediately to law school, or did you kind of do anything in between?
No, I actually worked at Mayer Brown for a year before I went to law school.
Oh, wow.
And part of it was to figure out and I had an opportunity. And in those days, of course, there were, lots of administrative and clerk type jobs. Different than today. And what they had was a library. They had a private library, which had 16 full-time employees. So, because everything was books, they were at the time, so this goes back to Lexis and Westlaw were two huge desks of machines, that use the phone to call up the database, and everything was database research. No one really had it except a place like Mayer Brown. They would have one machine, but other than that, it was, tremendous library with hundreds of thousands of volumes throughout the building, and it required full-time staff. So I got a job in the library, which was a really interesting job to have, in the library at Mayer Brown. I did that for a year and then applied to law school and went to law school.
Did you know that you wanted to go into law school getting this job, and you thought, let me see what the inner working is of a law firm?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I had the opportunity. And but I can say that I didn't know much about it. I didn't know really what it was going to mean, but I became really interested in research because that was one of the things I did in the library. And not so much just legal research, but if they had a case on, that had to do with some aspect of metallurgy, we would, research that as well. Mm-hmm. So that got me really into research and academics much more than I had been.
And what did you study in undergrad?
Political science.
Political science. Okay. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's the political science to law school route. Seems like there's, mm-hmm. There's definitely some connection there. And so was the Mayer Brown job that was back in Chicago?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so you were studying for the LSAT and sort of doing the application while
exactly
doing the job. Yeah.
Right.
And so what I read was that you attended law school in Chicago, and you sort of just wanted to and correct me if I'm wrong from reading some of these things about you. You kind of really wanted to focus on international law. Right. Which, as far as I understand, talking to a lot of, other attorneys that have been practicing immigration now for many years, I was lucky to have a lot of immigration courses at Brooklyn Law School where I went to school. But my understanding is that, a few decades ago, there was maybe one maximum class around immigration law. Mostly it's international. So when you went into it, what were your thoughts about kind of why international law and sort of what intrigued you about that?
Okay. So at the time, I had made applications, there's 9 law schools in Illinois. So I had made applications in Chicago. And I had heard that Northern Illinois actually was going to be offering courses that had a focus in international law. So that was it for me. I was already interested in international law. Part of it was the idea that it was different. International law seemed more interesting to me and more exciting. And there was a part of me that had an interest in, what became like space law. And the idea, here you're thinking like the early 80s here, and the idea of what's going to happen and what are we going to do, in terms of expanding the space program, things like that. And I thought, all right, well, there's going to be, a greater need, a growing need, on the legal side of it too, even if it's like satellites orbiting and legal issues around that. And I thought, and there was no space law at the time. There was nothing like that. So I thought if there's going to be, it's going to be through international law. So that was the real reason that I started to go into international law, was because I thought it would be the only route to space law, because I thought, okay, that would be dealing with, kind of international relationships.
Hmm.
And that's what space law would be, about too. And I was right about that because courses and studies in space law came out of international law.
Yeah, I recently was for some reason diving into the International Space Station, and I just didn't know this until I was doing some research. It's really kind of a hodgepodge of things built by, or at least funded by, many different countries.
Hmm.
It's like the American wing and the Canadian wing and
Right.
whatever. And yeah, that it truly, space exploration truly is an international endeavor. It sort of has to be. That's super interesting. And so, I mean, I presume that there wasn't much about space law at the time, but
No,
the
and
thinking,
I knew that I wasn't really going to go into space law practice,
right.
you know, um, at least, for the next 10 years kind of thing. But, and then I probably dropped the idea once I got into international law and really started thinking about what that meant and that there was, a real opportunity for me at the time to go into that kind of a practice. I didn't lose interest in it. I just didn't think, there was going to be anything happening. And there really wasn't for some time to come. Space law, anything having to do with that really came out of the government for many years. So,
Mhm.
and there's some small private things still today, that go on, some firms that'll focus on those kinds of issues, but it's really, mostly in the government.
That's still probably super cool. Like I,
Hmm.
I think to myself about, some folks maybe getting into international law or immigration law for that matter to travel, at least in part thinking that, hey, this will allow me to see the world from a legal aspect. It would be cool if you, going into space law, you're like, great, I have to travel to space, obviously, to understand this.
Got to see that space
You
station.
got to see space
Got to
station.
check it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So then I read that once you graduated, you then continued on and you actually got an LLM. I assume that was immediately after law school, but it was abroad. It wasn't in the U.S.
Right. So, yeah, I took the bar and I left for Europe like the next day, and was at the University of Salzburg, which was a joint program with McGeorge in
Hmm.
California, school law, and uh, and after that, my plan was, at the time, it was very likely that I wasn't going to come back to the U.S. I was going to stay out there indefinitely, and my first job after that was an internship at the UN. And that's how that happened. And I got that position through the program, at Salzburg.
And that was after you graduated and got the LLM.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
came back, got the internship, and at the UN, which for anybody is an amazing
Oh
experience,
yeah.
and a great thing to put on the resume. And then so you got the internship. You worked in the UN for, I presume, would be several months. Um, then I read that you sort of started looking for jobs and nothing happened, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know where you read that, but it wasn't quite like that. I mean, I did. So I came back to Chicago.
Mhm.
I had a job. Oh, I don't know how deep I get into this, but I did have a job offer with a firm in Florida who
Mm.
was going to do they were going to do some work with the Organization of American States, which, at the time had offices in Mexico and in South America. And they were going to do some human rights work, which was really fascinating for me. And that was going to be, like kind of the perfect job. I had, come out. I mean, I already had like a great opportunity. And especially at the time, we're still talking about like early to mid 80s to, be a US law grad
Hmm.
and to be able to work in that environment, as rare as that is today. It was even more rare then. I mean, there was no one that would do that. So I felt pretty lucky doing that. And then because of that, I got a job offer with this Florida firm that was going to build out this human rights practice. I came back to Chicago and I made a decision, kind of a personal decision. I didn't want to leave Chicago. Like
Mm.
I'd been gone and I really wanted to stay. So I talked to the people in Florida and thought, well, maybe we can do something. I can stay in Chicago. But the reality was, I mean, there was no really remote work or anything like that at the time, that I was just going to try and do something in Chicago. So I went to talk to firms about working. I did have the idea like, well, I could work and do international law, but obviously I needed, some kind of a, something of a format, and that would be somebody's law firm. So I talked to a lot of law firms about it, and they thought, that's where I wasn't like doors were not opening, and people were saying they didn't even know what it was. I mean, to talk about international law at that time, people thought it was a joke. And even at the time I went back to Mayor Brown, and I had worked in their corporate group, and I said, hey, and they said, come back and work in the corporate group. I said, I'd like that, but I'd actually want to work in the international, I'd like to do international law. Why don't we do that? And there people were saying at the time, and imagine this is the end of 1985, there's never going to be a practice called international law. That was in 1985, as late as 1985. Wow. And I said, no, you'll be boasting about your great international law practice at some point, and evidently it's not today. But one of the things, and this was the part where my, entrepreneurial spirit kicked in, and I realized that it had always been there. It was always going to be part of my life, but I was really frustrated that the firms weren't taking the leap. And it was that kind of like message that I was saying to myself over and over again that finally resonated, like, well, why don't I take the leap? Why don't I just do it myself? And again, I remember Joe Minsky, who was a great Chicago immigration lawyer, and there's a good firm in Chicago with his name still around, said to me, wow, that is really bold for you to open up your own practice, because that was the idea. I was going to open up my own practice, and it was going to be an international law. Hard enough to open up your own practice, especially again at that time, people didn't do that. They went and got jobs at firms. They built up client base, and then they opened up their own practice. But to open it up in international law, everybody thought that was really crazy, and it was just the opposite. So I was lucky because I was in an area that was like, you could call it, like from a MBA perspective, like way underserved, and there was no one that did it. So I actually at the time put my name in the yellow pages under international law, and I was the only one under that category. It was my own category. So I actually had a lot of, good luck, and that exploded. And so within, it was really just a couple of years, I probably had like 10 employees.
Wow.
In my own firm. Yeah.
That's incredible. What did you do? Do you remember that first client that called you or said, yeah, sure, let's work together?
I mean, yeah, I do remember. I do remember that first one. It was pretty awful because at the time, you're getting started, and I'm literally, and this is actually what was written somewhere. I actually walked up and down LaSalle Street, our banking street at the time, walking in and out of foreign banks, giving them a card and saying, I'm an international lawyer, just meeting people. That's how I first was going to get business. But there was someone who knew that I had opened up a practice, and they sent me a client. And it was an awful client, but we, at the time, and you're getting started, you take almost like whatever you can and whatever you can work on. So the first one wasn't memorable, but the first time I got a call from somebody at one of those banks, that was really something. That work had paid off. And it was probably within a couple of weeks of kind of banging on the doors of foreign banks that someone called me up and said, you left your card here. And someone just walked in, and they're interested in like opening up foreign branch in Chicago, and they want to bring their business to the States, and can you help them? And that was my first international. And then little by little, kind of word got out, and I did more and more, and I did some pretty fun, deals. So,
and I'm curious, you would say something like, yeah, of course I can help them. And then you hear what they need, and then you just figure it out, right?
Somewhat. There was some of that going on. I mean, a lot of it was, at the time you're really talking about either trade deals or organizational, like structures. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of, U.S. law to it and U.S. business law to it. But it often came down to like conflicts of law. It came down to drafting agreements that were enforceable in, two countries, mm-hmm. things like that. But more and more I did it, the more and more I started to understand trade and and how deals get done and paid for. And that was something that became, trade was a big area for me then, after a while. But yeah, a little bit, fake it till you make it. There's a little bit of that. Especially if you're opening your own practice, you just have to be careful about the areas you're working on. I mean, if somebody asked me to do something in employment law, I wouldn't have done it. But as long as it was business related, I muscled through it. And then I shared office space with some people that knew business, so I leaned on them a lot. And much different today. There are, for people starting out their own practices, well, there was lots of shared office space that people used until recently, but even now there's ways for people to find mentorship and get answers to questions that wasn't as available, but I figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more information out there, and we'll get to the company that you're working on now. Lawyer Exchange, which is what you built most recently. But there's so many opportunities, so many more opportunities now to connect with more experienced lawyers, to lean on folks who are not quite literally in the same room as you. But we'll definitely get there. I wanted to just take a pause and just for folks, anybody listening, leave a comment, shout yourself out, tell us where you're kind of listening in from. If you're from Chicago or New York, your neighbors, or if you're anywhere else in the country or the world, that would be really cool to know. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments, and just to give you a quick shout out. So Bob, I wanted to kind of I wanted to hear about this transition from international law to immigration law. You made a comment just a moment ago where you said that there was somebody who reached out and said, "Hey, we have a potential client who wants to open up a branch, or an office here in the U.S." My instinct, I mean, as an immigration lawyer, is like, okay, great, open up an office and then bring people here. You'll need a visa.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Is that how that sort of happened?
It was part of it. Yeah. There was a couple of things that came into play. I mean, in the practice of international law. Where do you go if you've worked in Canada and you're a construction firm, you've had a big deal in Canada, you leave it, and then all of a sudden the Canadian government comes after you for an enormous amount of taxes, and there's a tax treaty involved. Where do you go for that? People could look for an international lawyer. I used to do, I used to argue treaty and do treaty work too, and I was approached one time by a criminal lawyer in Chicago, a really well-known criminal lawyer, and his client was under an extradition. And they asked if I could help them in an extradition. And I said, for sure, it's clear treaty work. I mean, that part of it was, I had a lot of strengths in. So turns out this was an Italian who was in the United States and happened to be in Chicago. And the government of Italy wanted him back for what they used to say at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, a little bit of everything. Okay, this individual. And so we argued, and so I was hired to argue the treaty and the compliance, the government's compliance with the treaty. Well, we actually won that case, which was a miracle, and it was because the government goofed up. But what happened, and this is something I didn't know about, and I was about to learn, that they held, so when we were saying, okay, great, treaty can't be, enforced, and you got to let our guy go, the judge said, okay, soon, let me think about it. And what they had done was gone and called up immigration, said, come over here and pick him up. Okay, they weren't going to let him go. So, and I didn't really understand that part of it, because we were dealing strictly with the international aspect of it. I didn't know anything about immigration at the time. But this was my first introduction. So sure enough, the, officers picked him up, took him right back to Metropolitan Correctional Center, but now under a deportation order.
Wow.
And, now it wasn't the government of Italy that was requesting the United States to send him back under the extradition treaty. It was the government of the United States saying, this is a bad guy, we're going to get rid of him because Italy asked us under our immigration laws. And so he said to me, okay, now what do we do? And I said, you hire an immigration lawyer. I don't really know. He said to me, I want you, like little by little. And he did. He hired a couple of local immigration lawyers and then got rid of one and got rid of another. And he ultimately said to me, I want you to do this for me,
Wow.
because he had trusted me on the other one. And I thought, well, they're at this point where it's in trial and maybe we could kind of like work through this. And I was learning more and more about it. So I agreed to take that case. That case, we won, we lost. I mean, we won at the trial level. It was appealed. We won. It was brought back down. We won again. It ended up we ended up losing at the Seventh Circuit.
Wow.
We appealed it to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court's never found in favor of someone under a deportation order. And it took John Paul Stevens, I used to joke, like probably 5 minutes to deny the writ of cert. But they ended up sending him back. But it was that people started calling me from the, Metropolitan Correctional Center, to represent them in deportation matters. But that really wasn't going to be what I did. In fact, I couldn't wait to get back to business, So little by little, I kept saying no. I really didn't do much. Maybe I took another case or two, but really was staying away from it. And I certainly never did applications. I didn't know the first thing about applications. I was actually, in the, in the trial court and then in the district and circuit court. It was kind of interesting. But anyway, so now I get back into that. I ended up merging my practice into a larger firm because now we're in the 90s, and now, of course, every law firm is going to have an international law practice. So now I thought, okay, my small firm's going to get lost. So it's time for me to make a move and merge into a larger firm, and I did that. And now I'm really focused on my international business again, and here come the foreign nationals. And now we're at the beginning of the 90s, and now I'm focused on U.S.-China trade because I knew that was going to be a big opportunity, and certainly it was. We were bringing, like at least one or two companies a month to Chicago.
Wow.
And setting them up, opening them up, and sure enough, they all started asking us to help them move their managers over. Like, can you do the immigration? And in the beginning, we used to refer that out.
Right.
And after a while, I said to my partners, we really should probably establish an immigration practice here because I'm referring out a lot of work. And that's how my immigration practice started.
That's such a crazy story. I think one lesson, and I know you didn't end up going in this direction, but, and to your point, I mean, maybe you got a little bit, I guess I can say lucky that first deportation case ended up going to the Supreme Court. That's insane. I mean, what's the likelihood of that happening? But I suppose right. And it's like, but along the way, you probably ended up, you built a name for yourself. People heard about this. People talked about it. I'm assuming. I mean, how else does the correctional facility and all these other folks start reaching out to you? You could have probably built a substantial deportation defense sort of litigation practice. And I just, okay, you decided not to go that way. That's not what you were interested in. And obviously, that's where, that's how you ended up where you are today. But just as a general aside where like you can really leverage an experience like that, even if it was just one experience, to truly build on top of it and grow that into a practice. I know I talked to a lot of even immigration lawyers, but others too, saying they don't know which direction their law firm's going. And sometimes I ask them like, well, what have you done already? Can you lean into the experience you've already had rather than thinking about, something else? So I just thought that was so fascinating. What a cool
That's a great way to do it. That's a great way to do it. You can also be strategic and say, like, I like this. I want to go in that area and think about really, what it's going to take. At the time, one of the things that happened was Bush the first was he basically took away a ton of discretionary powers from the immigration judges when it came to the deportations, at the time when they were called deportations and not removals. But that worried me. That concerned me. I thought, wow, more and more they're going to take away discretionary powers, and that meant that you couldn't go up in front of a judge. In those days, and this is what we did in Carmine's case. You would put people on the stand to say what a great guy he was.
Mm-hmm.
You could say, you could put a priest on the stand. You could put, you'd bring people that he helped and, family members, and, couldn't do that anymore. And I thought, okay, this is getting, pretty statutory, and there's not going to be a lot of room. So I was a little bit concerned about that. But again, I had the option because, I had the experience on the business side, and that's really what, the direction I really wanted to go.
So we just have a couple of, I want to mention a couple of folks here. So Shiv says, hey, Roman and Bob from Atlanta. Hey, Shiv, thank you so much for joining. Always checking in and listening. Stephen Allred from Salt Lake City, Utah. Also gorgeous mountains, a lot of national parks.
Yeah.
Hey, Stephen. And we have here Scott from Minneapolis. How's it going, Scott? Thank you. And then Stephen also said, kind of as we were talking about your experience with the attorney or the client who said, listen, I want you to represent me in this case that you don't have much experience in, but I trust you. Stephen said trust and soft skills are so important, and it's so cool that they picked you to get involved with an immigration aspect of an extradition case. And I think that's, it's like, if you think about it, that client said, I know that you don't have the hard immigration knowledge, but the trust that I have in you and the quality of your representation for this other matter totally outweighed that. And I think that's also an incredible kind of, piece of the story. So thank you, Stephen, for that comment. So I think this part is really interesting because this is where you sort of realize, okay, we got to start bringing in the immigration work into the firm. Presumably the firm said yes, so you started building out your immigration.
Yeah, they love the idea.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think this is the point of your story where all of a sudden you start there's clearly you're taking a lot of work that was potentially yours, outsourcing it. You're now saying yes to it, which means that your workload is going to go up in the immigration space. You're becoming an expert. You're growing that practice. Can you talk a little bit about that and how long it took you from, when the firm said, sure, let's build on this immigration thing, to saying, oh my gosh, there's a ton of work. A ton of it is repetitive and just, shouldn't be done by human beings. We need, and then this idea of technology. What was that time frame and sort of how did that happen?
So, for me to go back in the years, what I do remember is that I knew, a lot about immigration, even a lot more than a lot of immigration lawyers at the time, but, on a constitutional level and based on the act, but didn't know the ins and outs of the application process. So I relied, learning that piece from other people that we brought into the firm. So once we made the decision, my partner said, okay, great idea. Let's do it. You run it, and I did that thing where it's like, well, okay, I know something about it, and how hard could the rest of it be? I'll figure it out, we'll do it. And, in terms of, so when you're building your practice, like you're saying, you've got to lean into the strengths, and this was no different, even though we were at a law firm. And when I'm helping law firms now, this is what we look at. What do you have that you don't have to work your, tail off? Is it that you have the marketing? Is it that you have the sales? Is it that you have the production? What piece of it do you have down already? And let's go focus on the other thing, to make it work, because you need all the pieces working together. So at the time, we didn't really have to worry about the marketing because we had a ready-made, work that was coming in from the current clients. In addition to that, we had this beautiful opportunity with cross-marketing across all of the business lawyers at the firm that never were able to tell their clients, oh, by the way, if you're hiring foreign nationals, we do that, So that piece of it was easy. It was more about the kind of the production side, which I definitely wanted to make sure we had. And then I had some old, some of my own focus on the way things should be. In those days, for whatever reason, immigration clients just weren't treated very well, and because it was just that kind of a practice where maybe you'd return their call and I wanted that to be different. I knew that, and I heard it from people. I heard that their pain points with immigration practices in those days was that they felt like, they'd hire the attorney and then they didn't know what was happening ever. So I used to tell my people, like, well, we're going to return phone calls like within 24 hours, things like that. So it was the production side of it, and then the application itself and where the applications were going and all that. And so we had a paralegal, I had an associate, and then I brought on an associate from another firm who became like my main associate, Melissa Garber. And she was the one that was my co-founder in VISANOW.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would watch the way she would do things, and also the paralegal. And there was this idea that, like, well, we do it this way. We ask for a document, we get the document, we review the document, and then we ask for another document, and we get that document, and then we review that, and then we determine what else we need, and then we talk about because that's the way it's been done. And I was like, wow, that is really, that's pretty cumbersome and clunky and time consuming and a huge waste of everybody's time.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the thing that I was, struggling with. So we were really focused on production, really focused. I keep saying that word, but you know what I mean, like really making the application, the service delivery, but always trying to make it better. And that's where we were. And I was really excited about that we were always trying to make it better, and so that's how we continue to build that practice. And that practice, because of that, when people would get word, that we had that focus, told other people. And so now we were still like word of mouth, in addition to being able to cross market. Now it was people were telling other people about it, and we were growing. We grew pretty quickly, as a practice then.
At what point, at that time of growth, did you realize that technology should start playing a role in your practice? I mean, I guess in the practice
Right.
of immigration law, but then specifically, within what you guys were doing.
That's a great, so that was the key question. And I'm smiling right now thinking about it, because technology wasn't the word, because there wasn't any technology in 1994. So we really started that practice like 93, 94, and it was about, responsiveness and streamlining and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
There was no technology except for, but I was somebody who was really into whatever was going to be current technology. I mean, if you think about it, like, the only thing that was available in immigration when I was doing this was a forms program that was created. You would get the floppy disk, you download it, it would have all the different forms. It captured, like, you didn't have a database. I mean, it captured like name, address, and phone number, so you didn't have to retype that into the form. Then you could, basically print it out and then type in the rest of it. But we were still using government forms too. We still had the big, wall of I want to say, like, the shelving, the thin shelving with all the government forms in it,
Mm-hmm.
to pull down. So so Impro was the name of it, and
Yeah.
it was done by a guy named Ken Ray, who was my hero. Okay, that he actually did this, and I really enjoyed meeting him and knowing him, because I always told people that that's what I built off of that idea.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened was, in we were probably around, it was kind of like, I want to say mid, maybe fall of 97, that as we were trying to work up better and better ways to streamline this, we had just gotten email capability at the law firm. And I'll tell you the epiphany and what had happened was that, now we had a few people in the immigration practice, and something had happened like one day and that would impact H-1Bs. And I knew everyone was going to have this question. When that happened, every single client called, and within a few days. And so I warned everybody, okay, get ready, everyone. We're going to get these calls all day long, like on this one issue, And sure enough, it happened. And I'm walking down the hall, and I'm hearing one of my paralegals, another one, the associate, they're all on the phone answering the same question. I go into my office, and somebody, and this was new, had emailed me the question. I mean, this is going to sound so like rudimentary and basic. It's so funny because we didn't know back then, so I did I thought if he emailed me, I'm going to email him the answer back. And I did what, my colleagues were doing. I answered the question. I took my 20 minutes and I typed out the answer. I hit send, and almost like instantly, another client, and this is where it all happened, sent me the same exact question. And it took me, if you can imagine, like a minute for it to register, oh my gosh, I don't have to write out this answer again. Like that was new, the whole concept. All I have to do is copy this thing, and wow. And that's when it came to me. And I ran into my associate's office and said, I got this great idea. What about this? What if people could actually, come on to a website, into their account, ask a question, and we could answer it. And for the questions, and this happens often in immigration, there might be 75 questions, that'll cover 80% of all questions in immigration. We could actually start off with a template, save a ton of time. Luckily, I always say this, it was Melissa who said, that's brilliant, or something like that. Like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. Because often, and this is so important when we have these ideas, she said, that's a brilliant idea. That turned into a business. That became VISANOW. That's where it happened. Okay. She could have just as easily said, I don't get it, or yeah, maybe. Because when you have a new idea, it's never been done before, people's first thought is, well, there's a reason why it's never been done before, right. And had she said that, who knows, like what would have happened, because soon after that, I'm telling other people about it, and other people are saying, that's ridiculous. I went to my partners and I said, hey, got this great idea. We're going to put the immigration application process on the internet. We're going to create a website. I said, all I need is $10,000. We're going to do this. They said, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard.
Wow.
They said, no lawyer is ever going to work on a computer and do law. Okay.
Wow.
That was in 1997. Now, obviously, that idea was worth, $100 million, and they could have had it for 10,000. Lucky for me, they said no.
Right.
So I said, okay, I'm going to do this, and then Melissa said I'm in, and we both started working on, really it was about, at the time, Greg was out with his website. Greg was the first one out with like content.
And this is Greg Siskin,
Greg Siskin, right. So he was there, like first one with content. Yep. And that was amazing. It was amazing because he had the idea of a ton of content, like accessible content for people. Mm-hmm. And that changed his practice. We were going to kind of do the opposite. Like he would have content and have people, he would draw people in and then he would take them offline and represent them. we were kind of doing the opposite. We were actually going to talk to people offline and bring them into the website to actually do the work,
Right.
and that was the beginning. That's how we started.
And so when you guys when you and Melissa said let's do this, did you quit the firm or did you just sort of start doing this, as part of supporting your practice but out of pocket?
Yeah, no, yeah, we moonlighted. Yeah,
Yeah.
both of us. Yeah.
Wow.
And I mean, I was a partner.
Right.
And so what I said at the time to the firm was, look, I love this idea and I'm going to do it.
Mhm.
So I said, but we'll agree that it's mine. That if I'm going to do the work, I'm going to do it at night. I'll do it on the weekends and it's going to be mine. I mean, they didn't have any issue. It wasn't like a best efforts issue because I already was, we were still fairly successful on the international side, in terms of that practice area was pretty strong. And then the other thing was I said, we'll run all the cases through the, VISANOW. Like VISANOW cost a small fraction of what we were charging at the law firm. So just pay VISANOW. So they even agreed to do that.
Wow.
Like we were just running through there because it made a ton of sense, to do it that way. And everyone benefited. I mean, VISANOW got off the ground. The firm was making a great, profit off it, and the clients were still paying less.
Wow.
So
And so if I can just kind of understand that, basically what the law firm said was, look, we're not going to help pay for the build out of this thing, but if and when you get it off the ground on your own at night, on the weekends, not during work hours, if and when that happens, we're happy to essentially start feeding you the work, or at least some of the work.
well, yes, but it was more so I was running the department.
That's true.
So I
Okay.
explained to them, like, this is how we'll do it.
Okay.
And they said, yeah, that makes sense.
Got it. Yeah, that's right. Because you're the partner, so you
Yeah.
kind of decided it. And I'm assuming that. And I'm just curious. Did you kind of go out and say to your clients, explain to them how it's going to, like we're doing this thing, and did they understand that it was a separate product, or did they just think that all of a sudden your firm has this really cool technology and the fees are now a bit lower too?
We were pretty careful about, making sure everybody understood what exactly was going on.
Yeah.
But we said that this is going to get your questions answered really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
This was going to get your application out a lot faster. Things like that were beneficial. Like we were able to articulate that value proposition, and everyone liked the idea. And the funny thing that happened was the firm never expected it to grow and explode. They never expected that. When Melissa left first, so to go back to your question, this went on for 6 months, and we were so busy on Saturday mornings and Wednesday nights, and that we said to Melissa, you should just go full time.
Wow.
And she, if I get this right, she more than doubled her income making the move at the time, more than doubled it, her associate income. And, as the partner, but not partner, we were a corporation, so founder at VISANOW. And the firm said, what happened? Like, why did she leave? And I said, well, she left to go to VISANOW full time now, like, why would she do that? I said, you don't understand like what we're doing. You don't really understand what they're doing. They said, well, is she sitting at a computer all day?
Wow.
Is that what she's really doing? And they couldn't understand it. But as soon as the word got out, they had a little bit of egg on their face. They said, okay, here's Bob, and they're and he's embracing technology. The firm isn't. All the young people were like, wait a minute. Look what happened to Melissa. Like, here she is now, and she's like living the dream, and she's got a much bigger salary than we do. And how did that happen? And so my partners were like, all right, now tell us more about this thing. Now they were interested. And I said, well, actually, actually what happened was, it was probably, let's see, that was 6 months. It was probably like toward, probably another like 8 months went by until I approached them and I said, I'm spending most of my time now on the phone with Melissa and VISANOW. We already
Mhm.
had a couple of employees. I said, and I got to go,
Wow.
and so that's what happened. Yeah.
That is, and they must, damn, if they're listening, sorry, y'all. Sorry.
Well,
Sorry
they
to miss
laugh
them.
at, well, so I, obviously became a client of that
Yeah.
firm, and I remained friends with lots of those partners. But I remember we were at a function a couple of years later, and the managing partner, the one who turned me down, was there, and he was lamenting. He was talking about like, yeah, Bob seemed to know like have something,
Yeah.
because Visa Now, by the time I left, Visa Now was doing is the same level of revenue in one practice area that my firm was doing when I left that firm in 75 practice areas.
Wow.
You know,
That's insane.
yeah, and we had 150 lawyers. And Visa Now, when I left, there were 15.
And,
Yeah.
and, and just so that we get, because I think now, maybe to skip ahead a little bit, um, you were you working with attorneys that were sort of at their own law firm? Were they sort of freelance attorneys that were just helping Visa Now? I mean, how did that sort of structure work back then?
You mean the attorneys that were working with Visa Now? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we would hire attorneys. Yeah. So we had a separate structure that
Mhm.
was a law firm,
Right.
that didn't have anything to do with like the Visa Now Corporation.
Got it.
And there was an agreement between that law firm and Visa Now, and it was almost like a captive.
So essentially, you kind of
I would do
started a
that.
law firm. You started two companies. Essentially,
Mhm.
you technically started a tech company and then
Mhm.
a law firm.
Yeah. Yep.
That's
Yeah. I mean, technically, what happened was we started it as a law firm.
got it.
Okay. When it came time to bring in investors, that's when we created the C Corp
Got it.
and then made the arrangement of how things would work between the two and transferred assets to one. And really, the only thing the law firm really owned was the employment contracts,
Hmm.
and everything else was at the corporation. But we had to be really, always had to be really careful, and the companies, to a certain extent, still operates that way.
Right.
And but under much more, even, like exponentially more controls now than we did back then.
Yeah.
You know.
So I mean, it's a really great segue because I think right now what we're seeing is a lot more um, interest from outside investors in technology related to immigration.
Hmm.
At the time, I suppose you were one of the first, if not the first. I don't know exactly, immigration tech company to receive outside funding. Can you talk a little bit about just like, do you remember what that experience was like?
Oh yeah.
What made you go out and say we need to raise more funds? Because it sounds like you were doing well.
Yes, we were, and I had no intention of really doing it. I thought we were going to bootstrap forever, because
Mhm.
that's the world I came from, in those days, and I didn't know what was going on in the West Coast at the time. And this is 1999. Okay, we're at 99. I'd left the firm full time. We're working and we're growing, and it's nice, and it looks pretty good, and it looks like, whoa, we're going to grow into a nice, self-sustaining law firm. And a friend of mine in San Francisco, an artist, had, I was visiting, and she said, God, you've got to like come out here and you've got to raise money. You can't imagine what's going on. People are, and this was all there was to it. She said, people are raising money to invest in companies. The companies then explode and they sell it for crazy money, you know? And I said, yeah, why would I do that? That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And it took me a little while. And she said, well, there's a guy, and then like months later, you know, well, maybe I wasn't out there, but anyway, months later, she said, there's somebody that wants to talk to you. And they really are interested. And it's along the lines of what I was saying. And, I said, okay, happy to do that next time I'm out. It happened to be the director of, God, what was it? What was that title? It was some kind of like, business development, but like services line development for Oracle.
Mhm.
I had a really big job at Oracle, and I had dinner, and he said, okay, so this is the way it works. And then this is 1999. And I'm like, well, it sounds kind of crazy. He said, well, what will happen is, we'll raise money and I and I said, but I don't really know how to do that. He said, well, I'm really interested in what you're doing. I think what you're doing is really, really exciting and novel. I would help you do it. And I said, oh, well, I don't have that kind of money to pay your salary. He said, no, you would give me 10% of the company. And my reaction was like, what? No way. Like, why would I do that? Again, it was my, naivete. I didn't really understand about leveraging, the value, leveraging your interest against the value in the company. I didn't really get that. So I said, well, just out of curiosity, what would you do? Like, how would you do it? And he said, well, right away, I would call the two biggest venture firms in Palo Alto, in this area. And one of them is garage.com and Guy Kawasaki. And the other one is Hummer Winblad, was owned by Steve Hummer, used to play in the Supersonics, and Ann Winblad, who was like on the top 50 list of, the most powerful women at the time. And I said, okay, interesting, but no thanks. I went home. The next day, I called both of them, because I thought, this is really kind of interesting, but I don't need somebody to be my CEO or whatever at 10%, and maybe I could do it. And now I'm kind of interested in it. Anyway, both firms said, yes, we want to talk to you when I talked to them. And I had called Guy Kawasaki directly. I just can I speak to Guy Kawasaki? And I used something like to get past the gatekeeper, like he's waiting to hear from me, or something like that, like along the lines of he's been wanting to hear from me about this,
I love it.
And that's what I think it was. He's been wanting to hear from me about this because I thought, okay, he's going to love this idea too if this guy from Oracle loves it. And really 15 minutes on the phone. Oh, so they said, no, he's not here, but I'll put you into his voicemail. And I thought I got like 10 seconds to get his interest. And I said, I've got something that's going to that automates a legal process. It's working and we're growing and it's going to be revolutionary and something, along the lines. He called me back within a day. 15 minutes, he said, can you come out here, to back out here to talk to me about this? And 15 minutes into the conversation, when I went out there, 15 minutes, he said, I'm going to champion this. Wow. We're going to get behind this. And that's how that happened. I did talk to Hummer Winblad. I ended up talking to somebody from Wilson Sonsini. It was Hank. He ended up becoming the CEO of Napster. Hank Berry. Wow. So he was working for Hummer Winblad, or for Wilson Sonsini, and he said to me, this is one of the coolest uses of the internet, and we think this is a winner because we've seen a lot of websites like law.com at the time, that are just informational. Mm-hmm. We really think this is the way it's got to go, and then he ended up going to Napster and he took a left turn on Napster and then they had that, ended up in court, and yeah, that wasn't such a great story, but I ended up with Guy Kawasaki. And there was a story how I was working somewhat with one of the big investors in Chicago, but I ended up going with Guy. And Guy was a champion. He was a great, great supporter and mentor. And it really helped me learn a lot because I didn't, as a lawyer, there was a lot that I didn't know about, launching a startup and growing a startup and all that. So it was kind of new at the time. I mean, I'm sorry, we've come to the kind of the end. I don't know how much time, how you do that.
If you have a few more minutes, I'd love to, no,
because I definitely want to tell you about what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, exactly. This is so fast. I mean, what a cool story and what an incredible experience. I mean, if you look back on the trajectory of even just up to this point, right, it's like the seed was planted. You had the idea, you planted the seed, it was planted, and it was growing, and then someone else planted this other seed that came from this world that you weren't really part of, right? But to the point you made earlier about sort of having the I guess the risk profile of saying like, you know what, if no one's doing it, I'm just going to do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of connected the dots and said Silicon Valley and all the craziness that was happening, especially around, the 98 to 2000 era, plus what you're building, which is a solid business in the Midwest where you might be a little bit disconnected from what's happening in Silicon Valley. Wait a minute, we've got what they need, right?
Right.
They just need to know about us. So, I think where a lot of people may have said, I don't know, it's not for me, I don't understand it. You kind of just said, nope, you asked the questions. I mean, it's kind of funny that you asked, like, what would you do? And then the guy told you what you do. You're like, great, I'm going to go do that.
So what worked for me, in that experience was that it was aligned with what I had envisioned,
Mhm.
which was very high growth. And as long as that got me there faster, it was aligned with what I was doing already. And that's the way I looked at it. And that is really what it's about. I mean, it's really what investment capital is about, is making it work faster. So I did get that. I did get that understanding, but I did feel that. And so you're getting to the point of like entrepreneurship, and the important ingredient really is the vision, and that, those things that come with it, like the drive and the persistence, and I'm not going to let it go. And even when things get bad, I'm still going to believe in it. And then I'm going to tell everybody else what I believe. I'm going to articulate like what I believe, and I'm going to get other people, to believe in it. So, so the piece of it that worked for me was I liked what they were saying about like, okay, we're going to do what you're saying you want to do, which is the same thing that happened when I met General Catalyst, years later. They said, we're going to do what you want. We're going to do more of what you want to do, and this is how we see it, and this is what we can do together. And so, so that's how that worked for me, and that's why that was something I could accept.
No, in sort of the interest of moving this along a little bit to understand kind of how did that transition from you raised, I think I read that you raised about $4 million or so in that first round, to then over the course of the next decade or so, right? There was this kind of slow and steady growth, and then you hit this kind of hockey stick trajectory somewhere around, I think I read the early 2010s.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about, or just what do you remember about that? Because, you just, to your point, you kind of had this same conversation, a little bit over a decade later with these other bigger firms, you got private equity coming into play. How did that happen? Was it just like you put your head down for 10 years and you worked and you listened to clients and you built and you grew, you build out more features, and then all of a sudden you were like, all right, we need another shot of espresso to get this thing going? Or was it something a little bit different?
Right. Yeah, well, there's a combination. I mean, I knew that we needed to spend more money, and I knew that we were going to go in the direction we wanted to go. It was going to cost more investment, and one way to do it was, to do it organically, which we were, a lot of us were ready to do, but there were a lot of investors that had been around for a long time, and they were tired, and they really wanted to get out, and there was an opportunity for them to get out. See, by that time, a lot of the investors that we had lost every deal. A lot of them had lost a lot of deals, and we may have been the only deal left for a lot of them. For some of them, we were like one of the few. We had some investors that did well, of course, too. But, and I'm not saying people were destitute. I'm saying that when they invested in startups, generally they didn't do so well, because unless you invest in a fund and you're actually doing it on your own and you really don't know what you're doing, a fund knows I'm going to invest in 10 and one's going to hit it. It's going to pay for the others. But when you're doing it individually, if you invested in 9, you're dead. Like you didn't know, you didn't get you didn't get the right one. You didn't get so we had a lot of investors that were like, no, we don't want you to invest anymore. We don't want you to grow anymore. You make a lot of money. We want you to pay. We want you to, get us out of here. And so that was part of it too. So we were talking about those things like on the board level, like what would we do? What's the best thing to do here? What's the best way to handle it? Well, we were approached by investment firms now again, because what happened was we had growth every year. Even in 2008 and 9, when the market tanked, we were gaining market share every year. You know,
Wow.
so I mean, the immigration market in some areas of immigration had dropped off as low as 70% in those 2 years.
Mhm.
You know, but we were still, gaining market share. Well, when it came back, in 2010, everyone was like excited, that they'd see really good growth. Well, we were seeing really good growth, but we also at the same time changed our strategy in sales, which had an enormously positive impact. So we were doubling our new business revenue every year, doubling it. And after 3 years of that, people came knocking, and that's what happened. And we talked about it again on the board level and said, okay, if the money's here, let's take the opportunity. We'll be able to help the tired investors that really didn't want to be in it anymore cash out, and for those that wanted to stay could stay, and we'll go to the next level. And we went through a process. We hired a firm and went through a process of talking to different investment firms, and then we came upon the one we decided on, and then went forward, and that's how that happened.
And if I can just, for the folks listening out there, especially those who might be either building or kind of growing their, let's say, smaller immigration or global mobility tech products, I'm just curious because I read a little bit about this, but to go from slow and steady growth to like doubling year after year, I read, and you mentioned that you kind of switched your sales strategy. I mentioned that it was something around like focusing on a little bit of a different market. I just thought, like, can you extract any sort of, suggestions or tips around thinking to yourself, all right, if I'm, especially in immigration, if I'm stuck trying to grow within this, potential prospective clientele, how can folks think about where else to look or how else to structure their business?
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to what I was saying earlier about like the different parts of your business, your practice. And so, know your product. I mean, number one, you have to know what your service offering is. You have to know what we call like, your what's on your menu, your list of services, and then the other part of it is to really know your market. Okay, because there has to be a fit, obviously, but you could fit that product into different markets. The question is, becomes what's the best one of those markets, that your product fits in terms of turning it into cash flow. So you could have a great fit, but it's slower, it takes longer to get, like large firms. Like, which startup doesn't want, boy, if I just go to that, get one deal with that large firm,
Yeah.
it's going to pay for all the others. We all do that. That's natural, because if I'm going to make phone calls and I'm going to do sales calls all day long, I'd rather, I'd rather sell to one person, than 100 and get the same
Right.
amount of money. And it's a natural tendency, but it's a myth. The large firm, the large company, it's almost a myth for the startup, because you have to, you have to, it takes too long. The landscape's too large. The landscape is too large and deep, and it just takes too long. The sales cycle is too long. So you have to sell it where you can. You have to figure that out. So you have to figure out the fit, and you have to figure out your market. And that's what we did. It took us a while. Now, we were selling into large companies. I mean, we had, AT&T Mobility and airlines, and like American Airlines. We had big companies, but they were a lot of work for us, and it was hard, for us to really kind of see the forest from the trees. So, but because we were not paying attention to the fact that the mid-size and the small firms absolutely loved us, and the large firms really liked us, but they were a ton of work.
Yeah.
So we finally said, you know what? If they come, great. They come, but let's focus on small and medium only. And that was the piece that happened all at the same time, and that's when we started doubling our business. So the lesson that I learned there, I mean, I love the SMB market, small medium-sized business market. I always say that I'm kind of an SMB guy now, and I like that. And that's like advice I give to, a lot of the startups is, one, like let's really pay attention to like what market you're going into, but don't underestimate how powerful that SMB market is, because you see the large businesses were well overserved by the law firms,
Mm-hmm.
and it was that SMB market that was really underserved. So it was really easy for us to close those deals.
And it feels like technology
Very
is ripe to serve the SMB market because the marginal effort to serve them is a bit lower since you have automated at least some of the stuff. So then you can get the same, if not bigger, margins on smaller clients. And if the sales cycle is shorter, if it's easier to onboard them, you can double, triple, quadruple.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like you've got a sales issue. If you've got salespeople, you've got to work through that. And because they're naturally going to think we should go for the larger one, so incentive has to be there and all that. But you're right. With the way that we can build technology today, it takes the same amount of effort to do one as to do 1,000. It's very, very different than it was, years ago. And but you've seen that with technology. You've seen that happen, like that scale in the way we order things and things are delivered and distributed, and food and everything else, like happens in that way. So same thing in law.
So after, and thank you for sharing that, because I think even for myself and for all of us, it's a constant learning process, and a good reminder to say, like, okay, even if things are going well, can you audit your own internal processes and think to, like, how can we make it better? And I think to the point you made earlier of having an outside push, yes, it's capital, but it's also sort of folks that are helping you look at your current situation maybe through a little bit of a different lens. So, I really want to get to what you're doing now, which is, I think, super cool and fascinating. And I think, I had some folks saying, in terms of immigration, but you've really largely kind of left the practice. So your VISANOW was sort of majority stake acquired. To your point, you really wanted to give that exit to a lot of the investors, the folks who believed in you. They were with you for so many years. And then you stayed on for some time, and I think eventually you kind of stepped away, right? And then, of course, that VISANOW rebranded to Envoy Global, and they are, who folks know as Envoy Global today, really great organization, still based in Chicago. We were just chatting before, we got on to the live of how I was able to visit their offices, and which was really cool to see, like, immigration tech really at scale. But after you stepped away from that, did you jump right in? Because now, I want to just for a little bit chat about what you're doing now. You built a company called Lawyer Exchange, right? Did you jump into that right away, or did you kind of take? I mean, sure, you were tired. Did you take a little bit of time off?
A little, maybe, not a lot. No, I was ready to go. I mean, I didn't want to stop working, and I had no intention to stop working. I mean, I moved it was almost like within the month, I moved from those offices to down the street into my own office to start working on something. And within that month, I started working on Lawyer Exchange. It was one of the things that I had always thought of. And if you think about it, it is tied to the work and the really strategy that I was using at VISANOW. Was really to, leverage people, okay, and be able to help people work remotely. Like we were to us, we were the first people that really thought about remote, lawyers, because because all of the client's data, was going to be in their account on the website. So you could access it from anywhere. I mean, we used to tell people, like, you give us your data, you give us it was novel to think that they could be, in another country, and all of a sudden they've lost their passport, but they could access all of their data. And that was novel. We were offering that capability. People were like, oh, it's in my account at VISANOW. Same thing with the lawyers. And when a lawyer would say to us, like, hey, and it happened, a few times, I got to leave. I'm, for whatever reason, I'm moving out of state. My husband is taking a job somewhere else. Whatever the reason is, we'd say, well, you keep working, I mean, you work from there, which again was novel, in 10 years ago, but we could do it. So just like, VISANOW came about, I knew if I continued to think about what I wanted to do, I knew I was going to leverage, legal tech. That was my world. I had been there. I go back to, like we've been talking about, when LegalZoom started and those guys, and I've known them for ages, and, all rock, so I thought, what's it going to be though? And one of the things that was striking to me was at the time, and this is like now 2016, 2017, thinking about how hard it was, the difficulty law grads were having getting jobs. So I naturally went into like the whole, contract freelance idea. And that's really where that came from. So I would really have them in mind, where I think, talking to Greg from Law Clerks, they had the other side in mind. Like they were thinking about the law firms that needed the help. And I think that was a big difference in kind of like focus and philosophy. We were always kind of focused on the lawyer that was looking for the work. And little by little, we developed that idea for Lawyer Exchange, and we were able to launch it, now, it was really kind of like the beginning of the end of 18.
And can you just briefly share what Lawyer Exchange
Yes. So, right. So it's a platform for lawyers that are looking for work on a project basis and lawyers that are looking for help on a project basis. So lawyers that need the help, looking for freelancers that, maybe not going out to their network, they can actually go online and easily find like thousands of potential, lawyers to help them. And then vice versa for lawyers that are looking for, projects, a place to go and browse potential projects to work on. And so, yeah, so I continue to do that for, just to tell you like where I came to be part of how to manage. we became partners with the ABA, and always looking for areas that it would make sense to promote the Lawyer Exchange, like through the ABA and different sections of the ABA that have those issues of like, I really need help, but I can't afford to hire somebody full time, that kind of thing. And I came upon How to Manage, which is a company that has kind of like fractional CEOs that go into small law firms and medium-sized law firms and help them grow. And I thought, wow, this would be a great partnership, because they have roughly 450 law firms, now that they manage and they and then they coach. And so I talked to them, and they thought, yes, this could be a really great partnership. But little by little, the idea came up of me working there as one of their CEOs, helping law firms. And little by little, I thought, well, the Lawyer Exchange is operating now, and it doesn't really need me, to be there, and it's something else I could do. And so I was really attracted to it, and I made a decision to make the move. And I did that about a year ago. And so for this last year, I've been working as a, coach / CEO, helping small law firms grow.
And so are you still involved with Lawyer Exchange? I mean, you're obviously the founder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And do you have a team? Because I'm assuming.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, we don't have any intention of it going anywhere, and that's still operating, and that continues to grow, and maybe, well, we actually formally never made the partnership with HTM, but maybe, at some point, and even with Lawyer Exchange, I continue to get calls from people that are interested in working with that on a, partnership level, and who knows what'll come of that. But people really enjoy it. The people that use it, they have great access to help. The associates, and a lot of associates get a lot of work out of it. So it keeps growing, and we keep operating.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. I remember you and I chatting about this a little while ago. I guess now it's probably more than a year ago. COVID really kind of has warped time.
Yeah.
But there's this other idea of maybe a solo practitioner who has clients in the docket but wants to retire. How do you find a good succession strategy? Or I know you and I talked about rural opportunities where you have someone at a law office in a rural area where there's not a lot of access to lawyers, and finding them there. So there's so many applications here, both from a growth perspective, access to justice perspective, for Lawyer Exchange, and I think that's super
right.
cool.
And for all of us, and for Lawyer Exchange, right now in this year, I mean, there has to have been growth in every one of the gig marketplaces, just because of what's happened to us. And even the Fed yesterday said, the economy will never be the same, and that'll be a piece of it. And when that really starts to sink in, I think you'll see in places like rural America where they are still struggling, they have A2J struggles going on, you'll see them using more technology more and more. I mean, they do have to build out infrastructure. They have bandwidth issues, things
Right.
like that, but you'll see that more and more. And so I think those things are here to stay.
Definitely.
And they'll continue to grow.
So before we wrap up, I didn't want to say we have Nadal says hello, guys. So just wanted to say, hey,
Hey,
we
Nadal.
have here Anu from San Francisco. So, hey, Anu. So, I think maybe as a final question to you, and, it's been such a cool journey to see. It's also interesting for me as someone who's deeply involved in immigration tech to see that you had this legacy in it, and you've morphed into a kind of law firm, legal tech and law firm growth expert, and you leverage your experience in the immigration space in that direction. And I think maybe it also goes to show that life doesn't have to start and end in the same industry within the legal space. It can morph and it can change. And I know this year, a lot of immigration lawyers, we'll see what happens with the presidency and all that, but a lot of folks were like, listen, COVID, plus a lot of the legal challenges that the immigration field has faced, people were thinking, I'm going to leave the practice. And that kind of
I've heard it. I have one of my members, one of my clients, was facing the same issue.
Mm-hmm.
I have a personal perspective on immigration, and that is that the harder it gets, the more that the immigration lawyers needed.
Mm-hmm.
And there'll always be in this country, it's what we were built on, and there'll always be a need for it. So I said, no, you hang in there, and by the way, we're going to have a new president. So, so we'll see how that, how fast that impacts the immigration. No, I think that, this is a nation of immigrants, I mean, and it means, and we talk about it, we celebrate it. It will always be that way. It's always part of it. There's never going to be a time where there isn't going to be a need. Or let me just say, there is never going to be a time where it's really going to be shut off. It's just not the way. It's just not what we are, and what this country is built on. And as long as that happens, it gets more complicated because the discussion is so heated.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that we end up getting more and more laws around it, because every Congress is so heated about this discussion, so, and what does that mean? That means that, there's a job for the lawyers.
That's right.
And to me, that's going to happen. So, that's always going to be the case.
I couldn't agree more. Elizabeth Jamie says, great talk, Roman Bob. So just wanted to shout that out. And thank you, Bob.
Thanks,
if we could end with one thing, I'm curious to hear, what are your thoughts about sort of, because I think you're inherently a visionary, right? Whether you like it or not, whether you like that label or not, I would label you certainly as someone who, you have a vision.
Thank you.
well, but you have a vision and you executed on it, and you had help along the way. You had new ideas built on top of it, like raising money. You didn't want to until someone explained to you the benefits of it, and then you said, you know what, that sounds good, right? And it sort of seemed to, you allow things to push you in the direction of your vision when you see that those things align with it. What's your vision of sort of the future of, I would say, immigration tech? But for you, you're more broadly even thinking about legal tech. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about sort of the vision, the future of the industry and where it's going?
Yeah, I'm glad people are more excited about it, and they definitely are. And there's definitely more discussion about it. And I'm hearing from more investors that they're interested. Um, you gotta keep track of the waves and where the investment wave is, because the investor thinks, they think about what you built. They don't love it like you love it. They don't think about it like, wow, this is a brilliant idea and this is going to make this part of the immigration application so easy. They think about, are there going to be a bunch of people on Wall Street that are going to drool over this? Like they think about their investment. Like, what does that mean for their investment? So you have to keep track of like where they think the excitement is. If you really want to follow, like where the investment's going to be. But I also am a huge champion of the entrepreneurs, and every small law firm is an entrepreneur. Every small law firm has got a vision, and they became a lawyer for a certain reason. They want to help people, whatever it is, and if they are good at articulating that, they're visionaries too, just like you are. You have a vision. You had a vision. You didn't build Laborless, without that vision and without that drive and all those things. So I would say, for me, go for that. Don't worry about, because we always become, thinking, we become thinking that it's part of it, that you've got to get something that investors come in on. Now, if you've got a great idea, go for it. I mean, law firms build businesses and they build multi-million-dollar businesses all the time without investors, but we just got into this idea that you have to have it. So I say, no, go, stick with your vision. You keep building it. When you start to show signs, that it's taking off, the investors then start getting interested, so anyway, that's what I think about, where how to look at it.
Yeah, I wouldn't can't agree more, and I think lawyers ought to remember that they are also entrepreneurs and founders, and to think of themselves that way, and kind of embrace that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because to your point, usually you start a firm because something didn't rub you the wrong way, working
Exactly.
for someone else, or you couldn't find the right thing. So lean into it.
Yep.
Chase says he totally loves and supports your. What's up, Chase? Thank you so much for chiming in.
For your support, Chase.
Yeah, exactly. Another fellow legal tech pioneer, truly, and somebody who really has devoted his career to it.
Yep.
If you can leave us with one thing, you said that when you came back to Chicago, you wanted to move back to Chicago. You didn't take that Florida job in part because if someone took you, grabbed you by the shirt, and moved you somewhere else, what would be the biggest thing that you miss about Chicago?
So what do I love about Chicago? Yeah, what would I miss the most about Chicago? I think it's got this balance like no other place in the world of, energy and, reality. Energy, it's got a great energy in terms of the culture, but on the other hand, people work hard. I always said that, and that's the city that works. I believe it, and I like that, and I've done business with people in every part of the country, and then of course lots of parts of the world, and I like that about Chicago. So I'd miss the that mix of the culture, and I don't know, probably the deep dish pizza.
Yes, there it is. The pizza. Oh man. Well, Bob, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I really appreciate you spending the time, taking a little bit of extra time. it's so inspiring, I think, to hear the story, especially the nuts and bolts of the beginnings of it, because people get trapped towards the beginning and they feel that they can't push on, and because they don't, that persistence dies and the idea dies. And who knows, you wait another half year, another year, and you could break through and kind of really make it. So I appreciate you spending the time kind of sharing, the step-by-step of your career really in your life, especially towards the beginning. And I think people will get a lot out of this conversation. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for supporting those ideas, and doing this for everybody. So
I hope it helps.
Yeah, I bet it does.
Yeah.
All right, great. Thanks, Roman.
Yeah, thanks.
And everyone.
So thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks for sticking around. I know this went a little bit long, but I learned more than I think I have on any call, and this has been wonderful. So I appreciate you all joining. Share this with your friends, share this with your colleagues, and stick around for the next episode next week. And in the meantime, have an awesome weekend, and cheers, y'all.